So you wrote the annual top 50 under 23, some of the top prospects and players in the NHL. Looking at specifically a few of the Blue Jacket players, you had Ken Johnson 7th. So he obviously came up late last season. In your mind, what's maybe a realistic next full season like for a guy like Ken Johnson? I mean, we know how good he was with Michigan and international play and things like that. And I'm looking at I don't know, Cole Sillinger, for instance, came up last year, made the team right out of camp, played a full season. There was rumors that maybe he'd go down, never did. So it'd be nice to see Ken Johnson be like that phenom guy that a team like Columbus could use. But what's your realistic maybe viewpoint of his future, or at least his upcoming season?
I think if they play him with the right line mates, if they play him at the top of the lineup, if they play him on the first power play, he's going to have a good year. I think Kent is capable of playing with those kinds of line mates. He's not a guy who is built for playing in a third line role. I think the beauty of Cole Sillinger was that, sure, you hope long term that Cole is going to be a top six guy, but because of how physically mature he is, because of how athletic he is, because of how strong he is, and because of just the kind of the scrappiness and feistiness and work ethic that he plays with, you always knew that Cole was one of those rare skill players who could start playing in the lower in the lineup and then work his way up. And most skill players can't do that. I think it does a disservice to a player like Kent Johnson to be playing him 10, 11 minutes a night. He needs to be playing with the Goudreaus, the Laines, those types of players to be successful. And I think he'll make those types of players better. And you'll start to see that sort of skill and flair and playmaking flash more than it did in his stint. I've spoken to a number of people about his stint, and they thought he was just okay, right? There were moments, but it wasn't consistent. And I think it will be if he gets the right usage. Now, whether the coaching staff is prepared to do that is an entirely different thing. If they're intent on winning games and making the playoffs, then maybe Kent Johnson doesn't get the leash that you'd probably hope for him. And maybe it's a little bit more of an up and down year than he would hope for. But I do think if they go start to finish with him, 82 games in a top six role, that doesn't mean he's got to be playing 19 minutes a night. But if you're playing him 16 minutes a night and he's on the power play, I think that's when you'll see him shine. And I think he's capable next year, if he plays in that kind of a role, of putting together a 40 or 50 point season. I think at his ceiling, he's going to be a much more productive player than that. I truly believe that he's one of the only players from the 2021 draft that's got an opportunity to be a point per game guy in the prime of his career. But that's not going to happen instantaneously. And frankly, there's not quite enough talent in Columbus, I don't think, for that to happen. As great as a sort of star player in the NHL is, even the stars, I mean, short of McDavid or Austin Matthews level, even the stars, their production is heavily influenced by who they play with. There's a 60-point player on Team X who becomes an 80-point player on Team Y. I mean, we saw it last year with Nazem Kadri, right? He'd never been that kind of a player until he was surrounded by all that talent and playing on that power play in Colorado. So yeah, I think Kent's fine. He'll be fine. He's going to make the adjustment. He's going to make plays. He's going to pull you out of your seat every once in a while. But it's not. I mean, he's not going to be a star right away. I just expect him to be a solid sort of top nine playmaker, and I think they should use him as a top nine playmaker.
Do you see him as more of a center or a wing?
Ooh, very good question. I tend to like players like him at center, just because he gets more touches, he has a feel for the puck more often. But I fully expect that he's going to be an NHL winger. I just think because of how skinny he is, NHL coaches are going to see him walk into the locker room and say that's not the kind of player that we want scrapping and fighting and playing against 210-pound centers in the NHL, right? Like most centers in the NHL nowadays are pretty thick guys, and that's just not Ken. He's always struggled to put on weight. He's a very sort of wiry guy, and I think that game lends itself to playing on the flanks, less defensive responsibility, that kind of a thing. So I expect he'll be a winger, even if he's probably he'd probably be a slightly more productive player down the middle.
David Jiricek and Denton, Mateychuk. You had each one 18th and 28th on your list, and it was kind of weird. I mean, not weird, but it was not often that you see a team with two top 12 picks take two defensemen like that in the first round. So how do you like either of those guys? And I guess maybe what's their timeline in your mind, like when they might be able to make it to the NHL?
I love both of them. I had Jiricek right where they took him at 6. and then I had Denton sort of 12, 13 all year. So they kind of took those guys exactly where they belonged. And I was a big fan of both of those selections. I think they're very different players. I should say that first. Jiricek is a very commanding player. He's got presence on the ice. He's a big, aggressive player, defensively and offensively, a very aggressive player. Looks to sort of impact the game and sort of impose himself on the game in a variety of ways, offensively and defensively. Uh, there comes some warts and some mistakes and that kind of a thing with a player who plays like that, who plays to sort of command the ice and make things happen. But because of how big and strong and athletic he is, he's capable of playing that game. And I fully expect him to become I'm not sure he's going to become a true number one, but I think he's got a real opportunity to become a number two defenseman on a team and be that kind of an impact player. And then Mateychuk is awesome. Denton's a fabulous three zone player, four corners of the ice, good in all of them, great in neutral ice, just a very complete hockey player. I think he didn't get enough love, frankly, for that. People view the 5'11" height listing, and they start to ask questions about whether he's going to be a good, as strong defensively as he is offensively. He's an excellent offensive player, creative in the offensive zone, can attack in the offensive zone, very good in transition. But it's his play off the puck that I think really stood out to me this last year. If you ask the guys in Moose Jaw about him, the first thing they'll say is he's as good defensively in this league as there is a player, right? So it's not just about the sort of offensive defenseman game that he plays. He's also a very capable player defensively, and I think he's going to be a top four guy. I would be surprised, frankly, if he's not a top four guy and not running a power play and all of that. So I think both of those guys are going to be potentially cornerstone pieces for them long term. And I like Corson Coolmans, who they took last year too. I mean, Corson doesn't have the upside that Jiricek and Mateychuk have, but Corson had a really, really good second half as a freshman last year after getting off to a bit of a bumpy start in college hockey. So between those three guys, they've got a good thing coming.
Yeah, I liked what I've heard anyway from like what you're just talking about those guys and what I've seen, and they got really good draft grades. So I'm excited to see how it plays out for them going forward for sure. Not on the list, but I know you like this guy, Jordan Dumay. You had him at some point ranked like 38th, while others might have had him a lot lower. So, and I like him just for the fact that we're about the same height. Me and him are like 5'8". So, how do you like Dumay? What do you like about his game that could work out in the NHL?
I love Jordan's game. The knock on Jordan was that he's 5'8" and his skating stride looks a little clunky. It looks a little awkward. And when you're small and slow, teams typically write you off. And I think the beauty of his game is that he's not slow. It might look weird, but he is not slow. He led that team. I've spoke a lot with the people in Halifax about him over the course of this season. He led that team in scoring. He led that team in takeaways. He led that team in retrievals. He was their best player along the wall. He won all of his races. Like the little details that you maybe don't expect out of a smaller player, they're all there. And I think that elevates him in a way because he's got the skill offensively. He's going to make plays in the offensive zone. He's dangerous. He's creative. There's some cleverness to his game. All of that is great, really high grades. One of the smartest players in the draft. He won the CHL's most sportsmanlike player award this year. Like there's just a lot of little things to like about him. And I think because of the concerns about the skating and size, he was just overlooked by default, and teams didn't do enough due diligence on how he was creating all those points he scored. I mean, this is a kid who had the most productive draft eligible season in the QMJHL since Sidney Crosby, right? Like this was a very, very impressive year for a 17-year-old. He had 109 points. That does not happen often in the Q, at least not for players that age. So, yeah, just an impressive player. And I ran into him in St. John. He was at the CHL Awards in St. John when I was there for the Memorial Cup to accept the most sportsmanlike award. And he looked bigger than 5'8" as well, at least just in terms of running into him. I'm 5'10", 5'10 and a half, and I don't think he was much shorter than me. So I think he might actually be an inch taller than 5'8" at this point. So we'll see. But no, I'm a big fan. Loved that pick. That was one of my favorite day 2 picks.